Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger with the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for August 4th, 2022. I'm going to begin today with a vote which took place in the Senate yesterday, in which a 95-1 majority voted to ratify an amendment to the NATO treaty to allow for the inclusion of Sweden and Finland as members. This is the part of the reaction of NATO to the situation in Ukraine. And what this means is that the senators demonstrated in both parties their continuing adherence to the war policies of the war hawks who control the U.S. legislative process. Now, some senators suggested that they see this as poking a thumb in the eye of the Kremlin. Now, this came a day after Nancy Pelosi crossed a red line with her trip to Taiwan, and it confirms that the war hawks are fully in command of both parties in the United States. Now, according to a spokesman from the Atlantic Council, the vote in the Senate on NATO expansion opens a door for NATO exercises and coordination on the borders of Russia with Sweden and Finland. It strengthens NATO's forward forces in the Baltics and sends an unmistakable signal of U.S. support for NATO members. This is, again, part of the war provocations that are being cranked out daily from Washington, which seem to take no note of the fact that the U.S. and the United Kingdom and NATO are increasingly isolated in the world. Now, on Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, the BBC dubbed it as a Pelosi love fest. And they said that the Taiwanese provided photos which showed Nancy Pelosi and a bowl of her favorite chocolate ice cream. Now, one Taiwanese historian described the euphoric reaction from some on the island as a belief that they need the United States to, quote, come in and save Taiwan, unquote. But at the same time, a poll shows that an increasing number of people in Taiwan don't think the United States will act in case of a war between China and Taiwan. That is a Chinese attack on Taiwan. So the question is, what's the purpose of this? Now, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, described it as creating a flashpoint out of thin air, as he and others believe there is no threat of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan unless it's provoked by this kind of action. Now, the shifting sands of the international strategic situation were the subject of an article in the current issue of the Council on Foreign Relations journal, The Foreign Affairs. And the article is titled, "Nobody Wants the Current World Order." Now, this is a classic example of sophistry, in that much of what they say in the article is true, but the intent of the article is to draw you away from the potential for solutions to this crisis. Now, the article begins by admitting that the current world order in existence today is a neoliberal unipolar world which professes to be, quote, an open rules-based liberal one, committed to democracy, free markets, and rule of law. And then it admits that in reality it's dedicated to protecting the, quote, dominance and imperatives of the U.S. military, political, and economic power, including a rejection of sovereignty. Now, all that's true as far as it goes, except it equates the goals of the present Western neoliberals and neocons with the real interests of the United States. And that's where the sophistry comes in. This policy is, in fact, a rejection of the real tradition of American foreign policy, going back to George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and John Quincy Adams, which is based on the real tradition, based on alliance among sovereign nation states acting in cooperation for the benefit of the other. That's what the principle of Westphalia is all about. Now, The article goes on to describe the world as, quote, adrift between orders, unquote. Again, correctly portraying the increasing isolation of the Anglo-American imperial interests. And it said this is largely in reaction to the rise of China. And it points out again correctly that the global South is not supporting the actions against Russia over Ukraine. But typical of this kind of coverage, it leaves out the solutions promoted by the Schiller Institute. Now, these include the bankruptcy reorganization of the collapsing financial system, something which is essential given the threats that are posed by food shortages, collapse of international healthcare systems, and so on. It also leaves out adopting the idea of a new Bretton Woods type development, cooperation, and replacement. Development and cooperation, replacing the neoliberal system with an American system approach. That's what the Schiller Institute is fighting for, in which you have cooperation among sovereign states for economic development based on advances in science and technology. Instead, it assumes that the world must continue to be a casino economy based on buying and selling of increasingly worthless financial instruments. Now, why is this so important that they're doing this now? Well, we've been reporting daily on the investigation we're doing into the arm of NATO's military intelligence psychological warfare division based in the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation, that this center has identified the Schiller Institute as the leading alternative to the rules-based order, which is promoting the continuation of the war in Ukraine. Now, when they published their list of 78 individuals who are Russian propagandists, 30 of those were participants in Schiller Institute conferences and included Helga Zepp-LaRouche, my colleague Diane Sayre, who's a candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, Jason Ross, and me. And there were other prominent people as well. But what's important is that this center, which was set up primarily as a psychological warfare operation that produced a hit list, what Scott Ritter called a kill list of opponents to the war, that they identified the Schiller Institute as the leading institution in opposition. Now, that's significant, and that's why we are emphasizing this and calling on people to join us in fighting back against this NATO provocation. Now, Ritter in particular singled out Chuck Schumer for his role in promoting U.S. support for this neo-Nazi center. He called it Schumer's war on free speech and identified in his most recent statement that one of the targets, Diane Sayre, is the LaRouche independent candidate against Schumer in the Senate election race coming up in November, meaning that here's Schumer supporting Ukrainian intervention into U.S. elections. Remember, there was an attempt to impeach Donald Trump, a successful attempt to impeach him while it didn't throw him out of office, over what? Russian interference, alleged Russian interference, which turned out to be a lie. But here we have actual evidence of Ukrainian interference in an election campaign, in particular an election campaign against Schumer, which Schumer, through his votes for funding the Ukrainian government, is supporting. So we have at the bottom of the description page today a statement which you can sign, a short statement you can sign and send to your legislative representatives, demanding that there be consequences for Schumer and the State Department for supporting this neo-Nazi operation to suppress free speech. So thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow's Friday. I'll take your questions. You can send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com.